we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves now, starting with myself. My name is Jordan. Hello, my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a senior currently. I'm majoring in data science and molecular and cell biology, double major, woo woo. And I'm pre-med, so I'm looking to apply to med school this upcoming cycle. And I will be the moderator. Next panelist would like to introduce themselves. Go ahead, Kyra.
Hi everyone, my name's Kyra and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a third year. I'm majoring in interdisciplinary studies, and my career path, I want to do things along like information technology and social media. So I want to go into research around tech policy.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyra. Next slide, Wesley. Go ahead, Sheena.
Hello, my name is Sheena. I go by the she, her pronouns. I'm currently a third year. I'm majoring in civil and environmental engineering, and I'm going into engineering project management.
Awesome. Ruchi.
Hey everyone, my name is Ruchi. I use the She series and I'm a junior right now. I'm also studying computer science and I'm hopefully going into software engineering.
Awesome. Thank you. Next slide. James.
Hi y'all, my name is James. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a second year, hopefully majoring in both computer science and data science with a minor in public policy. So my career interests and emphases include data science and public policy, as well as user experience design.
Awesome. And last but not least, Christian.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Christian. I'm currently a third year. I use the he, him series, and I'm a double major in data science and public health. And my career path is epidemiology and biostatistics.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wesley, next slide. So we're going to leave this slide up for a little bit so you can ask all of these wonderful panelists some live questions if you would like. We're going to start with questions that were submitted to us through the RSVP form, and we're going to leave this slide up until like 12:20, just to give you all a chance to ask some questions if you are so inspired by our panelists' wonderful answers. But we're going to start with the first question here, and Christian will be the first one to answer, even though he's the last one to present. Christian, who is one professor that you absolutely recommend taking a class from and why?
Yeah, a really great professor that I had a really cool opportunity to work with is Professor Aldrikari, who teaches Data 8 and spearheads a lot of the statistics department. I know Jordan is very familiar with her, but yeah, like their work is really inspiring and it really inspired me to really pursue a career in data science. And Data 8 was one of those introductory courses for the data science major. And they're able to connect with students in a way I haven't seen any other professor in my field been able to talk to students, especially in a very large classroom setting. So being able to make those like personal, intimate relationships with their students is something Aldrikari most definitely like values, and that's something that I really like in a professor. And yeah, just being able to get more insights from them, more personal experience from them as well, is just something that I have really found valuable in my career path and has really shaped the way I want to pursue data science.
Definitely, I could not agree more. When I took her last semester, even like the middle of like the online debacle, Stat 140 still was like one of the most instructive classes. It's a class that I think everyone should take, regardless of if you're like data science or not. It's a very informative class. So thank you for that answer, Christian. The next question we have is, what are some tips on how to study for CS exams? Ruchi, would you like to answer?
Yeah, for sure. So I think CS classes at UC Berkeley are pretty rigorous and the midterms and finals are definitely pretty challenging as well. So I think one of the things to study for those exams is to first start early. So like I would suggest like starting a week or two early, and like what I usually do is first spend like 3 or 4 days just kind of going over like the material in general of what we've learned so far, and then spending the rest of the time up to the exam kind of working on practice midterms from past years and then using that, because many of the times those problems like get repeated on the midterms. So if you see something familiar, it would be like easy for you because you've already done it a day ago. And then also like having a cheat sheet, because most classes allow that. So being able to fill up your cheat sheet as you take these practice midterms, where you can basically write down problems that you think would be useful, or just write basic tips or things that you want to remember.
Thank you so much, Ruchi. A very insightful answer. James, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to expand on what Ruchi said. I'm a big proponent of cheat sheets, even if they're not allowed, just as a study tool. For almost every tech exam I have, I don't know if they'll show, oh no, but I make cheat sheets that are basically double-sided, about two or three of them for a big exam. I usually first compile sort of all of the basic things. Those are like formulas or key concepts, especially for computer science. Diagrams are really useful, like your trees, your data structures, all of that. And then additionally, as I go through sort of like studying for an exam, I'll find problems that are difficult or that I struggled on and note down sort of what I struggled on about that and how I can prepare myself to succeed on those problems. And for me, the biggest benefit of a cheat sheet is, even if you don't really look at it during the exam, or if you're not allowed to have a cheat sheet during the exam, I find that the act of writing down all of that information and sort of having to organize your cheat sheet so that you get all of that information in one short section of paper really memorize or commits that information to memory and gets you thinking about how the topics are interrelated, what's most important for you to know, and so on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Both of you definitely hit on the two like main points of like how to study for a CS exam, because they can be challenging, lots to memorize. Thank you for that. Moving on to the next question, kind of a loaded question. We got multiple multiple questions kind of packed into this one question, but what are some easy, fun breaths that you recommend, given that you're taking a lot of hard classes within these relevant majors? Any decals that you suggest? And what's your preferred method of finding good classes? Sheena, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I am also a big proponent of like taking not just classes within your major that maybe you don't have to that are required, but also taking classes outside of your major to like get the most out of the Berkeley experience and the Berkeley classes here, because I think there's so many classes that are offered in Berkeley. I really want to talk about the language classes. So I've taken, I think, probably like 3 or 4 total English classes in 2 different language departments. And they have been really great experiences because I think the language classes here, you really do learn a lot, and the professors are very, like, they really want you to learn. Um, and so I've had such a good experience, and I always tell the people around me to do take language classes. Also because they are 5 units, so even though they're kind of a lot, like at least the introductory ones are like every day for an hour. Personally, I think that it's 5 units, and so it's like it makes sense that it's 1 hour, and also you're learning a whole new language, and so yeah, so you do have to put in the time into that. But I think that the professors really make it interesting. So I've taken Filipino and I'm taking Korean right now, and I just tell everyone like at least take one language class here at Berkeley. I think the language department here is really great.
Yeah, definitely, Sheena. I took Latin 1, and that was like one of my favorite classes here. Definitely take a language class, even if it's not for a breath. That is really, really awesome. Christian, would you like to follow up on that? Any other points?
Yeah, just to kind of like preface this answer a little bit, is like breadth is a really cool opportunity, especially if you're in the College of Letters and Science, to really expand outside of your interests, outside of your major. So the 7 course breadth is something that it has a lot of opportunity for you to explore different type of topics, different type of interests and stuff like that. So one of the classes that I actually really did like, and it's fairly easy, fairly really fun, is MCB 32, which is Introduction to Physiology. If you are kind of iffy and you're more on the technical side of like your major and stuff like that, and you kind of have like some interest in biology, the biological breath is really interesting to really explore. So MCB 32, when I took it, was with Robin Ball, and they were really, really cool, really interesting. But I also took the lab part of it, and it was really interesting having to just be given like a list of symptoms of a patient and stuff like that. Being able to kind of like recommend them a medicine is something that you're able to obtain the skills to do in this class, and I just find that really interesting. And it's also not too much of like a heavy workload either. So definitely exploring that type of course is really cool. Other courses I also recommend can also be like um, I did introductions to oceans. My major has nothing to do with the ocean, anything like that, but it's definitely a class where you have to take the physical science breath. But it's also really interesting because you get to learn a lot of like major topics, like environmental degradation, climate change, anything along those lines, and how it relates to advocacy. So that's a really inspiring class as well. And in regards to decals, any classes that like are incredibly different is in the decals. So I think there was like a introduction to Drake or something like that one year and stuff like that. And then Frank Ocean was also another one. So if you just want to find like community in a large university, decals is where it's at. And like you definitely want to do that work there. Another opportunity I've also had was being part of the Cal Teach program for a bit. So I did like a UGBA 82, and that is teaching elementary school students and middle schoolers. So in STEM, so I taught math and science in two different languages, in Spanish and English, and that was a really cool opportunity. And yeah, definitely just exploring outside of your major is really fun, and you really utilizing the breadth to the fullest extent is going to be a very growing experience for you.
Thank you so much for those answers, y'all. One thing that I'd like to add, just for like the way that I personally like finding courses, is like my two like go-to is Berkeley Time. If you do not use Berkeley Time, it's a part of your. There's a link on the Cal Central, berkeleytime.com. Great resource. You can find classes. You can sort by grade. You can see how like the distributions have been for that professor, which is really helpful if you're like, if being real, like I'm pre-med, like you need a good GPA to get into med school. So it's really important that that resource exists for someone like me who needs to make sure that I'm not taking a class that, you know, has a terrible average with a professor who doesn't have a great average. Like it is a stressful thing. So just utilizing that resource is great. The other thing that I use is I love the Berkeley subreddit for finding information about classes. People's comments on like the thread they're really genuinely helpful, and they give some great advice. And it's just kind of like crowdsourcing Berkeley students helping Berkeley students, which is genuinely a helpful thing. The next question that we have is a little bit more specific. We're looking at CS classes and the inequities that are very apparent in a lot of the departments at UC Berkeley. So the question is how to kind of go about dealing with that from like clear policies that leave out low-income students to sexism and racism that we definitely face as students at UC Berkeley. So first I'm gonna have Kyra answer this question.
Yeah, so as a Black woman, like taking these classes, I definitely know like how it feels to like look in the classroom and see people who don't look like you. First, like my advice is to go and find people like there's gonna be one. There's gonna be one, right? And have a validating conversation to whereas like, okay, my experience is not isolated, because that's really the first step in realizing that, you know, this is not your fault. You do belong here. Imposter syndrome is real. And reaching out to like clubs in tech that like are specific to you. Like for me, the Black Engineering and Students in Science Association has really helped me, like has been a resource for me in just dealing with that and navigating that. And I've also like been in conversations before with like the EECS department, like the chair of the EECS department, about stuff like this, about like my own concerns. And I was able to do that through BESA, which is the org that I just talked about. So getting in touch with these orgs can really allow you to even talk to like the chairs of these departments. Like we talked to the chair of the EECS and the CS department and told them like, hey, you know, like CS scholars, we don't really like feel like it's as inclusive as it should be, or it doesn't like recruit as much. So there's a way for you to voice your opinions to these people, and like, you know, we got some free lunch out of it as well. So, you know, just I would definitely say look for those clubs on campus that can support you, because even if they're not taking the class with you, they know somebody who's taken it, who looks just like you and went through the same thing that you went through. And I feel like that's such a validating experience to have somebody say like, yeah, I know how you're feeling. I can help you out. When I was taking 61B, there was like a Black TA, and she is like, let me know when you submit a Git bug, like I can be there for you. So really just reaching out to those people is my advice.
We'll go on to the next question, which is, does it get easier after declaring? Ruchi, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking about this earlier today, and I feel like it doesn't necessarily get easier. Like the level of difficulty of the classes is still definitely there, but I guess like the pressure's kind of like put off because you don't have to necessarily worry about maintaining a certain GPA to declare anymore. So that's a benefit, but definitely it doesn't get like easier, I would say. But I guess it also depends what classes you're taking. But I think the main difference between upper divs versus lower divs is that in upper divs you're not doing things that you might have already done before. Like in lower divs, I noticed like some of the things that we were learning are things that I've kind of touched upon before in other CS classes, like in high school or in like my own learning. But in upper divs, it's like a little bit more advanced and more specific. So I think those are the main differences. But I think regardless, the level of difficulty does stay about the same.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Sheena, would you like to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I think for me, from my experience, I really like my upper div classes right now just because a lot of my lower div classes were like freshman weeder classes like data 8 and like the math like one series and 53 54 and physics 7A and 7B. Like those are really big classes that a lot of different majors take, and like while they were I guess cool to take, they weren't necessarily what was in my major. And so now that I'm in my upper divs, I'm really taking classes I actually am interested in, rather than just classes that I have to take to learn more to like for like for my future upper divs. And I feel like the classes I'm taking now in my upper divisions are more applicable to what I actually want to do with my career. So that's really great. And I think on top of that, I think just the transition from like high school to college, and during your lower divs, I think that your study habits do change from high school to college just because your lifestyle changes. And I think like your first year or two in college, you like your study habits change and you're just kind of adjusting to this new lifestyle. And I think by like your junior senior, whenever you start taking your upper divs, like you have a better understanding of the way you work, in terms of like where you want to study and how you balance life, personal life and studying and work life balance. And so that's why I think after declaring and you start taking your upper divs, life does get a bit better. But that's just my take on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Personally, for me, like as a double major, it didn't really get easier after declaring, because it was just like it's always going to be a lot to handle. But I do think that your strategies get better, and you just kind of become more accustomed, and you just develop better habits as you like make your way at Berkeley. But I wouldn't necessarily say it gets any easier. But yeah, thank you for that question. The next question is very specific. It's directed towards 61B, but I think that after 61B, you're still handling projects. So if you have answers in general, please, anything that you have. The question is, how do you handle individual projects in 61B? And what courses would you recommend taking with CS 61B? Ruchi, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the projects in 61B are definitely pretty challenging and difficult. I think it also depends like what teacher you take, because I think HUG focuses a little bit more on like tests versus projects, and then it's the opposite for Hillfinger. So I think depending on who you take, like the projects are a little bit different. But in terms of the projects, I think yeah, start early. Try to get help in office hours, but office hours can sometimes be a pain if you go towards the end because you would have to wait a long time to be able to actually get into office hours because less staff, lots of students. Working in pairs is super helpful. And then also just doing conceptual brainstorming where it's like you're not sharing code or anything, but you're like getting together and like deciding like, oh, this is how you would go about solving this problem. So it's not that you're necessarily on your own for the main part of it.
Yes, definitely. Great advice. James, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think 61B is sort of the first class that gets you thinking really in terms of projects and in terms of how you're building your own infrastructure to help yourself succeed. So I think one thing that I took 61B last semester, one thing that I wish I had done a little bit more is making sure my auto grader tests or my own unit tests are really robust. And you'll hear this a lot from the teaching staff as well. Like, the one way you can actually know that you're on the right track, because the course really doesn't give you any sort of progress indicators, is to help yourself by writing great unit tests. And I definitely echo what Ruchi said in terms of those conceptual questions, because again, the course is so individual with the projects that even if you were allowed to work with another student and discuss sort of the actual code, which you can't, but even if that were the case, it wouldn't really help you that much, because likely you're going in two different routes. Every sort of choice at every step in your project leads to different routes and makes it so that the only solution is your unique solution. But definitely talking about the broader picture and using concepts about theory in class, about how should we do abstraction, how should we sort of build up this big infrastructure, is definitely helpful. In terms of other classes to take whilst doing 61B, I took EEC 16A last spring while I was also taking 61B. I found that it is very technically dense, and there's a lot of material there, but the good thing about that pairing was that 16A has essentially no projects, and it's more homework based and written math homework. So it's basically a theory class contrasted against a projects-based class. And even though the material in 16A is very heavy too, it's sort of balanced out. Also, I'll give you all the caveat that it was last semester and I ended up default pass no passing all my classes, which was beneficial to me. And I would say in general, if you have those opportunities, then go for it, because life as a CS or data science major is already hard as it is. So any way you can sort of reduce stress from yourself and make sure you're focusing on sort of what is right for you is going to be great. And in general, in terms of classes, I'd say 61B is also a great opportunity to look at breaths and do a lot of breaths if you need to get those out of the way, while you have sort of a big chunk of time dedicated to 61B projects.
Thank you for that, James. That is a great answer that I wish I would have heard. I took CS61B with Math 54 and my second semester of OChem and a breath on top of that, and it was atrocious. So I definitely recommend what James is saying. Take it with some breaths. It is a dense class and it does require a lot of work, but I would say it's a really rewarding class and you learn a lot. It's one of those classes that you will see in your tech interviews and you will talk about in your interviews a lot. It is a very important class in this track that we're talking about in this panel, but definitely give it the time of day. Definitely respect the workload that it gives you. So thank you for that. Great. I think the next question we'll go to is a live question that was just asked. What clubs do you recommend for computer science majors? Kyra, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I would personally not just solely stick to computer science clubs, just because I feel like clubs on campus are a way for you to like explore different opportunities that you can get. I mentioned BESA earlier, but BESA allows for you to like meet recruiters, meet like different like organizations and stuff like that. So if let's say you have interest in like kind of like maybe med tech or like environmental tech, right? Or something like that, I would find an environmental club, so that, or like a consulting environmental club. One of my friends is in like this environmental consulting club and she absolutely loves it. And I feel like doing something like that to really like find a community, explore your other interests will also help you stand out like when you're applying to like these jobs, because you can apply your tech knowledge to different things, right? You're not just able to apply it to like just like data structures and like coding, like just very like specific things, but oh, like I actually coded this in my club. I'm currently in a political and computer science club, and we do projects around like just political things. We did a project around like Supreme Court and like the relationship between that and gender. So really exploring your different interests and maybe seeing if there's a club that kind of connects maybe tech and your outside interests. I wouldn't really stick to like just solely tech everything. Like I feel like that would be kind of exhausting. So I would definitely explore your interests with different clubs.
Thank you, Kyra. What a great recommendation. James, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Kyra just said. And I think there are, I guess, two broad paths to think about when you're doing extracurriculars and also CS or engineering work. One is sort of you stick with that and you want to go very heavy, like consulting clubs, computer science clubs, do a lot of projects, which is a valuable path. And then the other path is, I think, what Kyra spoke about a little more, like how do you apply your technical skills to your interest areas outside of just tech. I personally have found myself on the latter path. I'm obviously involved a lot with the ASUC, but am also doing work with the Berkeley Political Review. So I run their essentially their data operations. So I combine both website management with sort of data science and analytics skills, which I found really rewarding because it allows me to use things that I'm learning in classes for data science and CS and apply them to unique projects. So I'd say it's up to you. Just extracurriculars are a great opportunity for career development, but there also should be something that you really are passionate about and that you know you'll want to be invested in and that brings you joy at the end of the day.
Thank you, James. And Ruchi, do you have anything additional?
Yeah, so I wanted to like kind of agree with what Kyra said earlier, which was like the fact that like there's a lot of clubs on campus that are focused on like coding, but like if you're coding on a code after classes, that's really exhausting. So picking clubs that are there to support you mentally, I think, are kind of the move. So I've been part of this organization on campus called Femtech, which supports like women. And so I think that's super important because we've kind of created this community of like women in STEM fields. And that's like super helpful because we can discuss like issues that we're facing, as well as there's like a tutoring program within the club. So it's like women teaching women. So that's super helpful too. And so, yeah, those are the types of organizations that I would recommend.
Awesome, Mel. That's some great club recommendations. I really like to hear about all of them, and some of them I've never even heard before, and I've been here for 4 years, so really appreciate that, y'all. The next question we have is, what is your hardest experience in a course / what's the hardest course you've taken kind of at PAL within these little groups that we have? Christian, would you like to go?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the hardest courses I've taken here in Berkeley was probably going to be Math 54. That was a very rough class because it's coming after your first year of probably taking a whole year of calculus courses. And then this is the first mental shift that you have in a mathematical course here in Berkeley. So it's a much more conceptual, much more abstract in a sense that you don't really have something obtainable that you can see in a clear sense, but it's more so like concept and theory based. At least the class that I took it with under my professor was much more theory based than it was calculations. So a lot of proving, a lot of proofs that we had to do during the midterms, and very long proofs as well during the midterms in a short amount of time. So you had to be quick. You had to know like what a lot of the concept was in and out in order to apply them. And then at the same time, like Math 54 takes a lot of time, and you are all, not only a student, but you're also like out there working at an org or you're doing a club. You're a leader on campus and stuff like that. So you can't really like contribute all the time you can in this course or all the courses that you're taking, but you can do what you can for this course. And that's where it's like a little bit of the hardest course I've taken in my experience here in Berkeley. And yeah, for sure, definitely come prepared for that class.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, 54 is a time. Sheena, would you also like to answer?
Yeah, the class I'm gonna talk about is actually related to 54. It's Math 53. So kind of jumping off of 54, like similar to 54, it is after taking like Math 1A and B, which I guess is more similar to AP Calc or a high school CAT class, just a bit harder. 53, I think, is also one of the first math classes after taking those that is also a mental shift because now you're in not just the 2D realm, but the 3D realm. 53 is multivariable calculus. And so that was also, in my opinion, it was a very hard class because of that mental shift, also because I think, and this is like pretty similar across all 53 classes, no matter what professor you have, but the workload is so much. Like, I don't know what the math department is thinking when they decide to have like 3 homeworks to do every week and then a quiz weekly as well, and then like 2 midterms. But 53 is a big workload, but at the same time, I also thought it was a very interesting class. But maybe that's just me, and I think maybe I'm crazy and I think multivariable is interesting. But even though it was interesting, it was a really hard class. So I think if you are going to be taking 53, to keep that in mind, that it is a quite heavy class in terms of workload as well as concepts, but I also think it's definitely doable because it is interesting. And there are also a lot of resources for 53 as well as for 54. I think both Math 53 and 54, a lot of people take, and it's also cross major, like it's not just CS or engineering majors that have to take it, like there are multiple majors. And so I think it's also very possible to find other people taking it as well. And there are also a lot of tutors available for these classes, so.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you both said like 53 and then 54. That was the hardest classes. One class that I would like to throw in the ring for, in my opinion, was Data 100 was really hard for me. I think for me, the reason why Data 100 was so hard is I wasn't expecting it to be math and CS like at the same time. They're basically, it's like taught by like a stats professor and then like a CS professor, and then the lectures switch. So my brain had to like switch between things like a lot. And so, and it still has kind of like the project-based vibe of like CS 61B with like the rigor of like 50 or 54. And I wasn't expecting that personally. So I really had to work my butt off and like attend all the lectures. Like it was just definitely a hard course. And the tests were also very specific. I made like the longest, most in-depth cheat sheet that I have ever made for a class for that Data 100 final. Definitely everyone has a very different experience. Like for example, for me, my 54 class barely even had homework. I think it really depends on the professor you take. So definitely everyone has a unique but very valid experience because these classes do be hard. So speaking of hard classes, let's talk a little bit about the tutoring resources that are available at Berkeley. Kyra, would you like to start off with that?
Yeah, so you'll probably see like for every CS class, like CSM, sign up for CSM. I made the mistake of when I took 61A of being like, why would I sign up for extra tutoring, like another class? And then when I like took 61B, I was like, yeah, I'm in CSM. I'm signing up for extra tutoring. Like, do not like go away from that. There's also HKN. Utilize that. Another thing I feel like is slept on, when you are taking your practice exams and you have a question, email your TA. Email your TA like a screenshot of like what you wrote down, your thought process, have them like tell you like what you should be doing. And like if you don't even want to do that, email the exam prep TA, like email anybody. Like that I feel like was the most helpful thing for me. Like in 61A too, like I emailed my TA and I said, oh, like I don't really understand like this question. And he wrote out like this whole email of like explaining the question. So do that. Like if you don't do anything, do that. Like email your TA all the questions that you have about like these concepts.
Yes, thank you so much. I do want to like emphasize that point because you all already pay so much for tuition. Like, please, like if you're good before you get a private tutor, make sure you utilize all the free resources first because there's a lot of free resources that are available to y'all. Yes, definitely. Sheena, do you have any other like resources that you'd like to advertise?
Yeah, just really quickly, I would say like the way I think is the best way to study for especially STEM classes is just to do practice problems. Like just do practice problems because that's all your exams are going to be. It's all just like problem sets essentially. And so tbp.berkeley.edu I think is a really great resource. TBP is essentially just they offer a database of past exams that you can use, and it's very well organized, by midterm 1 to your final, also by the date. Utilize CBP and just do those practice problems. And then also, I think just getting to know people in your major so you're able to study with people, I think is very valuable. I think also, if you know any upperclassmen, I know a lot of upperclassmen are very willing to help you with your courses. Similar to how like we as upperclassmen are willing to be part of this panel, we just really want to help you. And so I think at Cal the community is strong. And so I'm similar to just reaching out. Like honestly, if you're feeling lost, I think there are a lot of people here at Cal who want to help you out. I think it's just a matter of finding those people. But I think it's very possible to find these resources. So yes, finding community as well as TBP is really helpful.
Yes, definitely. I also want to shout out what Christian said in the chat. Utilize Piazza. Literally, like, ask Berkeley students for help. I feel like Berkeley students are there for you. They understand your experience. I think that once you reach out, like, it is helpful. But speaking of Berkeley students, let's talk about the climate of CS a little bit, because that's definitely something that you hear a lot about and that we experience a lot. So definitely want to touch on that. So what advice would you all have for somebody who loves CS as like a subject and as like their major, but kind of hates the climate of CS right now? Kyra, would you like to answer first?
Yeah, so with the climate of CS, I personally feel connected to this question. Just because I'm an interdisciplinary studies major, like I was majoring in data science and I'm not. And so yeah, I would say, what are you passionate about? What are you passionate about? Like, what do you want to do career-wise? Like, are you even interested in data analytics? And also, don't let the school like tell you that you can't major in CS as well. Like, just right off the bat, like before you even think about switching, don't even let the school like tell you that it's not possible just because you don't have a 3.3. I know people who have appealed and got in. Like, it is so possible. Like, especially if you get an internship and you have not declared, tell your manager to write you a letter of rec for your appeal letter. Like, just do it. Like, before you even think about switching, don't get persuaded in that, like, oh, I'm not good enough. Like, you can be good enough and not have a 3.3. Like, it is so possible. But if you don't like even want to do CS, maybe you're not really as passionate about software engineering. Like, I personally don't like object-oriented programming. Like, it's just not my thing. Like, I don't like it, but I'm so passionate about data analysis, data analytics. So I knew that I wanted to do something along that. I knew I wanted to go into research. And with the help of a great advisor, like, I found out like, oh, I could actually do interdisciplinary studies and combine all that, right? So really think about like, what are you passionate about? What do you like to do? And how can you combine those things? Like, I feel like data science is a great major if like, you're interested in just like kind of the other things about CS. Like, maybe you're not super passionate about software engineering. I know a lot of people are in CNR who are like doing a lot of like CS stuff. So look into that. But definitely like think about your passions and what you like and how you can really make that like your study.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that answer, Kyra. Really, really appreciate that. James, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think sort of it's widely known that Berkeley in particular has a problem with sort of the CS academic experience and sort of environment that CS and data science students and just students at large sort of find themselves. And that was, I guess, one of my primary concerns about when I got into Berkeley, like considering if I should go to Berkeley, was sort of like, well, there's all grade deflation, and I've heard sort of the horror stories about like people ripping pages from textbooks, and I'm sure that everyone's heard those scary stories. But Ultimately, I wanted to be here because of sort of Berkeley doesn't just, I guess, shuttle you down the path to be just a software engineer on a CS track. Some other schools only offer computer science as engineering focus paths, and like no discredit to software engineers. I think like that's a totally valid path, but there are also, as Kyra said, so many other paths to explore. And one of the great things about being in CS and LNS in particular is you're allowed and encouraged to take so many different classes that aren't necessarily just EECS classes, or you don't have a very prescriptive set of classes that you have to take. So between each student, the classes that you take every semester isn't going to be the same across all of your classmates. And that's something that really makes CS and data science at Berkeley really unique, and it's something that I've really enjoyed. And I think that's sort of the way out that I see in terms of the CS climate is you are able to make the experience the best for you, and you should definitely do that. So if you're interested in data science and how it applies to public policy, then maybe consider the public policy minor. Or if you're interested in environmental policy or environmental work, consider CNR and data science. And I think sort of at the end of it, you're also a student in that CS or data science sphere. So you can actively choose not to partake in that cutthroat climate that you're like, it's completely a choice. Like you don't have to consider grades. You don't have to measure your self-worth against sort of what grades you got on this project or this exam for this class. As Kyra said, your grades don't define you, and they especially don't define you in a field so broad as this. Like part of what makes CS and data science really valuable is that people can combine it with humanities or social sciences or other sciences. And that's what I think, in my view, employers are looking for. So if you're taking those classes and really applying yourself and showing your passion, then that will come out in your later life choices or in career paths as well. And on that note, I have to hop out. I have a midterm to go take. But thank you all for listening in. See y'all.
Bye, James. Thank you so much for that answer, right as you were going. This is a great answer. So we're wrapping up here. We have 5 minutes left, and there's one important question that's on all of our minds with our phase 1 appointments coming up quickly here. We're all picking classes basically by the end of the month. I want to ask, how do you decide what to take for phase 1? I'm going to start with Christian. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, so for phase 1, there's obviously like a unit cap that we all have to be under in order for the first phase. And these are the classes that I would recommend that you are able to get the classes that are the most impacted. So the ones that get filled up the quickest is the first phase that you want to get down. So those classes are definitely going to be the ones that have few seats. If they are under like a different major department, then definitely make sure you get those classes first as your first phase 1. And then also just make sure that you are able to get all your major classes down first, because that's one of the major things, especially if you're under before your sophomore year and stuff like that. So your first 2 years, like it's really imperative that you like are on track to your major goals and stuff like that. And also make sure you have alternative classes just in case those get either filled up or you have other opportunities to take other major courses in the first phase. So phase 1 should definitely be the classes that are difficult to take in, the ones that fill up the quickest, and the most popular ones, in the hopes that you can also get in there. But if not, always have a plan B ready.
Yes, definitely prioritize those major classes first. Y'all want to graduate on time, so make sure you're doing that. Sheena, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and just jumping off what Christian said, like, I think a great way to like find which classes like you should prioritize is through Berkeley time, because on Berkeley time you can see the enrollment history of the class. If you just play around, and I don't know the exact steps for it, but if you just play, it's a pretty easy site to navigate. But you can see like when these classes fill up in terms of time. So like from the first enrollment date to like essentially the first day of class and on, you can see how fast like that growth is. And so you can see how many people tend to phase one it. And so if you see a lot of people are phase oneing it, then you should also phase one it, because getting off wait lists, it can be hard, it can not be, depending on what class it is. I think also just by word of mouth. So like, for example, I think a class that is pretty like known to have a pretty long wait list is data 8. And so like, just by word of, if you just hear that like a lot of classes are known to fill up pretty fast, and so if you're intending on taking those classes, then phase one it. I think something that also helped with just general planning for classes is having a 4-year plan. So like, what I do, I don't know if a lot of other people do this, but it's something that helps me a lot, is having just like a Google sheet of the classes I need to take, and also just looking at your majors. If you search up Berkeley, your major curriculum, you can usually find what you do need to take to what classes you need to take to fulfill all your major requirements, and then planning that out, because you can also, it's also a good way to see historically if those classes are offered in the fall or the spring or both, or if they're also offered in the summer if you want to take summer classes. Berkeley Time is the place to go for all of that. So yes, Berkeley Time is a great resource to use. And yeah, that's essentially all I have to add to that.
Definitely, thank you for sharing that fact about data 8, Sheena. Like, I was 300 on the wait list when I first enrolled. I still got in somehow. It is a very like volatile thing, enrollment. So definitely check out the Berkeley Time enrollment like section. It is very helpful. Kyra, speaking of Berkeley Time, do you have anything to add about that at all?
Yes, Berkeley Time shows you how many people get a certain grade in the class. So I would take that as like, when you're doing your phase one, look at that and see, okay, so I'm like a very like stats person. I love statistics. So looking at that, I'm like, when you see, it'll say like, oh, this is the average grade. You take that, but look at how many people in the class actually got like the grade that you're looking for. So look at the percentage of people who got like grade. It might say that the average grade was B, but 60% of the class got an A, right? So look at that. Don't say like, oh, I don't want a B, I want an A, but most people got an A. So when you're looking at your phase one and trying to like write out all your classes, also planning out classes, just to like plug interdisciplinary studies, ISF, you write out all the classes that you're gonna take. So I like don't feel stressed about like picking out classes anymore, because I literally wrote them out for like every semester. Like I literally go to my notes like every week and like, oh, do I want to change this? Like I've been doing that for so long. So just to like heads up, I feel like I'm a little cheater. Like I don't have to like worry about that anymore. So yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Kyra. Definitely plugging ISF is important. I'm going to throw it to Sheena before we have our last answer from Ruchi. So go ahead, Sheena.
Yeah, and then just to like also like add on to what Kyra said, when you also addressing a previous question, if you are looking for like breadth classes to take, a great like feature for Berkeley Time is that you can like check off like class to like find classes that, for example, fulfill your American cultures or like your R1A R1B, or it fills up this breadth, or and that breadths are also different per college. So like, and they have it for every college, and so you can like click those off, and then it filters, and then you can also sort it by like grade, and then you can just be like, oh, this class has an A average and it fills this breadth, great, I want to take that one. So that's also a really great resource to use if you were just looking for classes.
Yes, definitely want to plug that. Like for like pre-med, I needed to find a class that was international studies and arts and literature. Don't ask me why, just needed an arts and literature breadth for my English second major. And it was Berkeley Time is so good for that. So thank you for plugging that resource, Sheena. And then Ruchi, last answer of the panel. What do you got to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think they covered most of it in terms of like how to pick classes in the beginning. One thing I wanted to add though was that there's this app called Coursical. So if you download it, you can kind of figure out like what courses will have like will change from closed to waiting, and it will notify you when that happens. And so like that way you can kind of do a switch in case like you want to get into a class but it's closed. And so like if there's a waiting spot or if it just turns from waiting to open, it will like notify you so you can immediately be the first one to do it. So I would recommend downloading that app. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had to add.
I did not know about that, and I'm already registered for my last like set of classes. So sad, but that is definitely a great resource that I wish I would have. So this panel, I'm learning something new every day. Thank you so much for that. Well, that's it for the panel. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you all so much for watching the recording, if you're watching the recording. And thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists, including James, who had to leave early for a midterm, for being here. We really appreciate your insight and your leadership and your awesomeness. We all appreciate you all so much. Have a good rest of your day. We will make the recording available as soon as possible for those of you who are still here. But yeah, thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now, y'all.